I remember the day I first arrived in Egypt as if it were yesterday. The blazing sun, the sand whipping up like 1,000 tiny needles on my face, and my heart pounding with the excitement of youth. It was the late 1890s, and I was a young artist who had come here to copy the exquisite tomb decorations for the Egyptian Exploration Fund. I was not yet the seasoned excavator who would one day uncover the greatest treasure of modern archaeology. At that time, I was simply Howard Carter, a young Englishman entranced by the allure of the past. My early years in Egypt were filled with long, weary days spent recording inscriptions and painting the intricate details of tomb reliefs. I learned to see not only with my eyes, but with my mind. I listened to the stories that the desert winds carried. I was taught patience by the relentless sun and developed a taste for dust and sweat. The Valley of the Kings became my classroom, and the old masters I studied were the countless artisans who had adorned tombs for centuries. Somewhere beneath the sands of this valley, I knew lay untold secrets. As the years passed, I honed my skills and gained a reputation for being a meticulous excavator. By the time I met George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, in the early 1900s, I had experienced both triumph and disappointment. I had worked on several tombs and sites, often modest finds but always with care and dedication. Lord Carnarvon was a man of wealth, refinement, and an unquenchable thirst for adventure. He was also a man who longed to finance a discovery that would cement his name in the annals of history. Together, we formed a partnership that would last many years. He provided the funds and influence, while I provided the expertise and tireless commitment. By 1917, after the disruptions of the First World War, Lord Carnarvon and I had made steady progress in the Valley of the Kings. We had been granted a concession to excavate in the valley, and year after year we toiled under that scorching Egyptian sun, unearthing small finds, fragments of pottery, the remnants of tomb furniture, a handful of minor artifacts. We had come painfully close to discovering something of significance but never quite reached the threshold of greatness. In truth, many archaeologists and Egyptologists believed that the Valley of the Kings had yielded all its secrets. The tombs of the greatest pharaohs of Egypt's 18th dynasty had been found. Men greater and more famed than I, Theodore Davis, for instance, had walked these paths and declared that nothing of importance remained. But I clung stubbornly to my instincts, formed from countless hours spent in the dust. There had to be something here we were missing. By the time we reached 1922, Carnarvon's patience and resources were running thin. He had threatened more than once to end our excavations. We had, after all, invested a fortune without any commensurate return. But something within me would not give up. I studied old records, re-examined the valley's topography, and pored over old maps. There was a small area between the tomb of Ramesses VI and the tomb of Meneptah that had never been systematically cleared. The ground there was cluttered with ancient workmen's huts, debris from previous excavations, and innumerable fallen stones. I recall a conversation I had with Lord Carnarvon that autumn of 1922. It was late, and we sat by the flickering light of a lantern in our camp. He looked at me with a weary skepticism. "Howard," he said softly, stroking his moustache, "I fear we have reached the end of our rope. I have sunk so much time and treasure into these sands. Perhaps it's time to admit that the valley is bare." I took a sip of my tea, feeling the grit of dust on my tongue. "My lord," I replied, meeting his gaze, "I ask you for just one more season. There's a patch of ground beneath the debris near the tomb of Ramesses VI that nags at me. I cannot say precisely why, but I believe we have missed something. Just one last chance, and if it yields nothing, we will stop." He sighed deeply. "All right, Carter, one last go. But I warn you, after this, I shall have to call it quits." I nodded, feeling an odd mixture of relief and mounting dread. My entire career rested on this last roll of the dice. We started work in early November. I ordered the men to clear away the huts and debris. Our methods were careful and systematic. Each basket of rubble was examined, each layer meticulously recorded. It was hot and tiresome work, but my foreman Ahmed kept the men in good spirits. He was the backbone of our labor force, a steady hand who had worked with me for years. Around noon one day, just as the sun was hitting its zenith, I heard excited shouts. A young water boy, Hussein, had stumbled upon something as he tried to find a secure spot for our water jars. Quickly, I made my way to the scene. There, barely discernible under the dust and stone, was the top step of a cut into the valley floor. I knelt down, brushing away the dirt carefully with my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. More steps followed. My mind raced, a flight of steps leading deep into the bedrock. Could this be it? Could this be the entrance to an unknown tomb? Over the next few days, we cleared more steps, 16 in total, descending into the dark, untouched earth. By candlelight and lantern, we reached a sealed doorway, mud plaster, stamped with unfamiliar cartouches. I recognized them as the cartouche of a king's name, but it was partly broken. Still, the ancient seal of the Royal Necropolis Guards was there, a sign that this tomb had not been entered since antiquity, if indeed it was a tomb. I was shaking with excitement. My first instinct was to send a telegram immediately to Lord Carnarvon in England. He had departed just days before to tend to affairs at Highclere Castle. The message was curt but urgent. At last have made wonderful discovery in valley. A magnificent tomb with seals intact. Congratulations. Waiting for Carnarvon to arrive in Egypt was agony. I dared not break the sealed door without my benefactor present. We had worked so long and so hard together, and I knew he would want to witness this moment. The days dragged on. I fussed about the campsite, rechecked our security measures, and posted guards to ensure that no intruder disturbed the sealed entrance. By late November, Lord Carnarvon and his daughter, Lady Evelyn, finally arrived. It was early morning when their boat docked at Luxor. I greeted them at the landing. Carnarvon, though still pale from the journey, looked thrilled beyond measure. Lady Evelyn's eyes sparkled with curiosity and delight. "Carter!" Carnarvon called out, struggling to maintain his typical aristocratic composure. "By Jove, is it true? A sealed doorway?" I nodded, smiling. "Come, my lord, I will show you," I said quietly. We made our way into the valley. The workers had done well, the site was immaculate, and the entrance steps were now cleared. We stood before the sealed doorway. Carnarvon inhaled sharply. Lady Evelyn gripped his arm. "Howard," she whispered, "this is marvelous." After a brief consultation, we decided to break a small hole in the upper left-hand corner of the sealed door. We wanted to see what lay beyond. I took my chisel and carefully tapped at the plaster until it gave way. With trembling hands, I lit a candle and held it up to the hole, peering inside. I will never forget that sight, the warm glow of the flame illuminating gold, endless gold. I could barely form words. Behind me, Carnarvon whispered urgently, "Can you see anything?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Yes," I managed, "wonderful things." Within that chamber lay a pile of strange, luxurious objects, thrones, chariots, gilded couches, caskets, and statues. It was a jumble of unimaginable splendor. The style was undoubtedly from the 18th dynasty. Already I suspected that this might be the tomb of the little-known king Tutankhamun, a name that had surfaced occasionally in old records, but whose resting place had never been found. Over the coming days, we carefully widened the hole and entered the first room, which we would later call the antechamber. It was crammed with treasures. The Egyptian authorities sent inspectors to record our finds. Carnarvon and I were ecstatic, though we maintained a studious calm in public. Privately, in our tent, we would speak in hushed tones. "This surpasses anything I could have hoped for," Carnarvon said one evening, sipping cognac. "I never dared dream. Carter, this is the moment we've toiled for." I nodded, still numb with disbelief. "We must be thorough and careful," I said. "We have found wonders, but let's not rush. A careless move might break something of inestimable value, both historically and artistically." As we catalogued items in the antechamber, we noticed another sealed doorway, this time at the far end, guarded by two imposing life-size statues of a king. They stood facing each other, dark and mysterious, their black resin faces bearing serene expressions. Beneath their crossed arms, could that be the entrance to the burial chamber itself? Carnarvon, Evelyn and I stood transfixed before them. The atmosphere in that subterranean world was electric. Hundreds of objects blocked our path, and we realized it would take months to record and remove the contents of the antechamber properly. I began to organize a meticulous system of photography, cataloging, and conservation. Nothing would be taken lightly. "Howard," Lady Evelyn whispered, "just look at them. It's as if they are standing guard after all these centuries waiting for us." I nodded. "I know, we must be respectful. This tomb was sealed for over 3,000 years. We must treat it with reverence." That evening, over a modest supper, Carnarvon seemed lost in thought. "I wonder," he said slowly, "what awaits us beyond that sealed door. If the antechamber holds such treasures, what might the burial chamber contain?" I gazed at the shadows cast by our lanterns on the canvas walls of the tent. "I hardly dare imagine," I replied. "But if the tomb is indeed that of Tutankhamun, we may have found something truly unique, an intact royal burial from the greatest epoch of Egyptian history." The weeks that followed were intense. Every object in the antechamber had to be photographed by Harry Burton, our master photographer. Under my direction, the team carefully recorded each piece, assigned it a number, and planned how to best preserve it. The dryness of the tomb had allowed wood, textiles, and delicate ornaments to survive in astonishing condition, but they were fragile. The slightest mishandling could destroy a piece of history. Our laborers were respectful and cautious, but it was slow work, excruciatingly slow. Carnarvon and I were both eager to reach the sealed door at the back, but I would not rush. The world was watching us now. News had spread, and journalists and curious travelers hovered around the valley's entrance. Security became a real concern. Carnarvon stationed guards and limited access. The Egyptian authorities were involved, ensuring that everything proceeded according to law and proper archaeological protocol. One day, as we were carefully moving a gilded couch shaped like a mythical animal, Ahmed approached me, looking concerned. "Effendi," he said, using the respectful Arabic form of address, "the men are worried. They say there are rumors of a curse. They are afraid that disturbing this tomb will bring misfortune." I sighed, wiping the sweat from my brow. "Ahmed, please reassure them. We are scientists. The tomb is ancient and precious, but there are no such things as curses. We must do our duty." "Of course, Effendi," Ahmed replied, bowing slightly. "I will tell them. But they will need your steady hand." Over the weeks, a canary I had brought to the dig was said to have been devoured by a cobra, an omen that the Egyptians took seriously. I dismissed such talk, but I could not ignore the tension among the workers. Nonetheless, we pressed on. It was in February 1923 when we finally cleared enough of the antechamber to approach the sealed doorway guarded by the statues. With equal care and ceremony, we chiseled a small hole. I remember lighting the candle again, my hand trembling slightly. I peered inside and was met by the sight of a solid wall, a gilded wall it seemed, filling the burial chamber. This was a wooden shrine, one of several nested shrines that protected the royal sarcophagus. The emotion that welled up inside me was indescribable. We had found a pharaoh's undisturbed resting place. I called Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn over. We widened the hole and cast a flashlight beam inside. The room was dominated by the large gilded shrines, one inside the other, like Russian dolls. It would be a monumental task to remove them safely to reach the king's sarcophagus, but the treasure we had found already was beyond compare. We had discovered the last resting place of a nearly forgotten king, Tutankhamun, who had slept here quietly for 33 centuries. "Carter," said Carnarvon softly, his voice catching in his throat. "We have done it." "Yes, my lord," I replied. "This is it. This is what we have dreamed of for years." Lady Evelyn took my hand and squeezed it. "The world will never be the same," she said quietly. Over the following months, and well into 1924 and 1925, the work continued. Meticulous excavation was required to dismantle the gilded shrines. Each shrine was documented, photographed, and carefully disassembled piece by piece. Within these shrines we finally reached the outermost coffin of the pharaoh. It was inlaid with precious stones and gilded surfaces. Inside that coffin lay another, and inside that yet another, 3 nested coffins in total. It was a staggering find. The innermost coffin was made of solid gold, weighing hundreds of pounds. The opulence, the craftsmanship, no words could do it justice. When we finally laid eyes upon the mummy of Tutankhamun, still wrapped in its linen shrouds, with the famous gold mask covering the face, I felt tears in my eyes. I was not a man given to sentimentality, but this moment was transcendent. I remember Carnarvon standing by my side, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "Howard," he said quietly, "the ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife, in the immortality of their kings. In a way, by opening this tomb, we have granted King Tutankhamun a form of immortality he never imagined. He will live forever in the minds and hearts of modern man." I nodded, unable to speak. Every artifact we uncovered added to our understanding of a world long gone. Our work was painstaking, sometimes frustrating, but always filled with awe. We were writing a new chapter in the history of Egyptology. Not everything was smooth. Amid our triumph, tragedy struck. In April 1923, Lord Carnarvon fell ill. A mosquito bite on his cheek became infected, and to our shock and horror, he succumbed to blood poisoning in Cairo. I rushed to his bedside, but I was too late. The man who had believed in me, who had provided the means for this great discovery, was gone. I remember the emptiness I felt. Without Carnarvon, I was forced to deal more directly with Egyptian officials, journalists, and an increasingly sensational press. The world was fascinated, and not always in a respectable manner. Newspapers seized on Carnarvon's death to spread rumors of a mummy's curse. It was nonsense, of course, but I could not control the stories flying around. One afternoon after the funeral, I sat in the half-shade of the valley, looking at the distant cliffs. Lady Evelyn approached me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Howard," she said softly, "I know this is a terrible blow, but you must continue. My father would have wanted you to see this through." I nodded, my throat tight. "It is what he would have wanted, yes. I owe him everything, Evelyn. Without him, I could not have done this." "We will carry on," she said, determination flashing in her eyes. "For him, for history, and for King Tutankhamun." Despite the loss of Lord Carnarvon, the work continued. The Egyptian Antiquities Service oversaw every step, and I did my utmost to maintain the highest standard of archaeological technique. Piece by piece, we transported artifacts to the Cairo Museum, where they would be studied, conserved, and eventually displayed to the public. The extent and quality of the burial goods were astounding. The tomb had been prepared in haste. Tutankhamun died young, around 18 or 19 years old, and yet it was filled with all the necessities for the afterlife. Chariots, weapons, games, jewelry, ceremonial chairs, and the famous throne with the intimate depiction of the young king and his wife. Everywhere we looked, we found traces of a vibrant and fascinating court life. We spent years at this work, from 1922 well into the late 1920s, carefully recording and removing thousands of objects. The tomb was small compared to the grandiose tombs of other pharaohs, but it was intact, and that made all the difference. It offered a priceless snapshot of the splendor of the 18th dynasty court. Throughout this time, rumors and myths swirled around us. Some in the press exaggerated the idea of a curse, others accused me of smuggling artifacts or mistreating the Egyptians. All these accusations hurt me, but I tried not to let them distract from my mission. I knew the truth. We were doing the best, most careful work we could under the circumstances. "Howard," Lady Evelyn said to me one evening as we shared a quiet dinner, "you look so tired. Will you not rest?" I smiled at her, grateful for her concern. "My dear Evelyn," I said, "I can rest later. I have not only a tomb to document, but a legacy to uphold. Your father invested in this discovery, and I must ensure everything is done properly." She nodded. "He would be proud of you." By the early 1930s, the main excavation work and artifact removal were largely complete. The tomb had yielded thousands of objects, each one recorded in our meticulous catalogues. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo had become the new home for Tutankhamun's treasures, and scholars from around the world studied them, rewriting what we knew of the boy king and his era. There were, however, regrets. I often found myself thinking of Lord Carnarvon. He had not lived to see the full magnificence of the find. He witnessed only the tip of the iceberg before fate took him. Without him, none of this would have happened. I owed him a debt I could never repay. I also reflected on the changing face of Egypt. Nationalist sentiment was growing, and the country was striving for more autonomy and recognition. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb became part of their cultural heritage, a symbol of Egypt's glorious past. I was happy to see Egyptians take pride in this treasure, though it sometimes meant negotiating the terms of our work and publications with increasing complexity. Despite the challenges, I never regretted a moment. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was the apex of my life's work, the culmination of decades spent under the relentless Egyptian sun. I had given my youth and my strength to the quest of rediscovering a lost world, and I had succeeded beyond measure. As the years passed, I found myself drifting away from the frenetic pace of the archaeological front lines. After concluding the main work on Tutankhamun's tomb, I spent much of my time preparing the definitive publication of the excavation. The world wanted details, photographs, drawings, descriptions of every artifact. It was a monumental undertaking. My old friend and photographer, Harry Burton, had provided a wealth of visual documentation, and our team had compiled mountains of notes. I worked on these publications into the 1930s, traveling occasionally between Egypt and England. I gave lectures, wrote articles, and oversaw exhibitions of the Tutankhamun treasures as they astonished the world. The global fascination with the Boy King never waned, and I was both proud and a bit overwhelmed by the attention. Schools wrote to me, museums begged for a glimpse of the mask or a loan of a single artifact, and ordinary people dreamed of the Nile and the wonders beneath its deserts. Yet I remained a somewhat private man. I never married, preferring a solitary life with my books and my memories. My health began to fail as I aged, and the limelight I had enjoyed in the 1920s and 1930s gradually faded. The world moved on to new fascinations, new discoveries. World War II overshadowed much that had come before, and by the late 1930s, I was just a name in the headlines of yesteryear. Today, when people flock to see the treasures of Tutankhamun, whether in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo or in traveling exhibitions, they marvel at the artistry and opulence. They think of the curse of the pharaohs, they think of the golden mask, and they think of a young king who died too soon. And if they know the history, they think of me and Carnarvon, two Englishmen who dared to believe that the Valley of the Kings still held secrets. The world has changed immeasurably since we found that first step in the valley floor. Archaeology itself has grown more scientific, more careful, and more respectful of the cultures it studies. We set a standard then, in our slow, meticulous approach, that future generations would emulate and surpass. The tomb of Tutankhamun remains the single greatest archaeological discovery of the modern age, not just for the wealth it contained, but for what it revealed of a civilization's inner soul. Now I often remember the sight of that candle flame illuminating a wall of gold. I recall the triumphant grin on Carnarvon's face, the gentle encouragement of Lady Evelyn's voice, and the awe I felt at seeing a world frozen in time. That moment defined me. It defined us all. The story lives on. The Boy King from the sands of Thebes lives again in the hearts of anyone who has ever stared into the eyes of his famous mask. Through that mask, Tutankhamun looks back across the millennia, and in the reflection of its golden surface, he whispers of eternity, and of those who dared to seek it in the silence of the desert. The end